Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Zenaton, and welcome to today's video for Legends of Runeterra. Today's video is going to be a new style of video that I've been wanting to do for a while for my channel. We're going to be looking at a very powerful deck and analyzing the deck, its strengths, its weaknesses, and talking about how to counter this deck. Now, it's been a couple of weeks since the latest expansion, Forces from Beyond, has come out. And it turns out that Kaisa is basically the new shiny toy. Kaisa is the most popular champion, the most popular deck in the entire game, in fact, right now, with multiple different versions of Kaisa decks too. Mono Kaisa being the most popular deck, but there's also other decks like Severe Kaisa, Action Kaisa, and some weird memes too, and just a couple of bad Kaisa decks that have pretty much fallen off, like Evelyn Kaisa. But yeah, Kaisa is the strongest deck, so we're going to be looking at Kaisa, analyzing Kaisa decks, and talking about its strengths and weaknesses, talking about how to, in theory, counter the deck. And then at the very end of the video, I will give you some decks that should counter or at least do well against the deck, because in my opinion Kaisa is very, very strong for a number of reasons, one of which is doesn't really have a terrible matchup. So to start with, let's actually just look at the deck. So here we go. We're going to be looking at Mono Kaisa. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of Kaisa decks out there. There is Severe Kaisa, Action Kaisa, and others, but Mono Kaisa is the most popular. I'm just showing off a very standard list. There are other lists out there that are playing things like Chain Vest over Ranger's Resolves, no Radiant Guardians, no Void Abominations, Durand Protege? I want to say the 3-mana 3/2 Durand that gives a unit 1 health and tough. But they're all pretty much very similar in terms of what they're trying to do. They're trying to just spam units with keywords, play a Kaisa on 5, maybe 6, attack in, and get an insane amount of advantage from that and win the game. So let's analyze the deck. Why is this deck so strong? First off, this is not a new playstyle. We've seen a playstyle very similar to this in the previous meta in the form of Papercraft Dragon. That's probably why you might also be wondering why no one plays Papercraft Dragon anymore. It's honestly because Kaisa decks are just better Papercraft decks. You play your unit, you try to keep your unit safe, and you attack with that unit. I could be describing both Papercraft decks and Kaisa decks. Papercraft, you play like Renekton, put Papercraft on it, and then you attack with the big Renekton and try to kill your opponent. Maybe put it on like a Fizz or a Ruin Runner or something else. Now, by going into Kaisa, you don't have to play Bandle City. Most people agree right now that Bandle City is not doing too hot. And by cutting out, you still get to play Shurima, because Shurima's busted and really great. And now you get to go into Demacia, and Demacia is a really good region. Champions in Demacia, not so good. Spells and followers in Demacia, pretty great though. But what's the strength? What's the biggest problem? What's the biggest problem you're going to be looking at when you see Kaisa? The turn 5 Kaisa. If your opponent is smart, assuming, like, we're going to be assuming, of course, our opponents are playing smart and perfect, or at least near perfect. We're not assuming someone's just dropping a Kaisa on 5 with no spell mana or something, because those are bad players. Assuming your opponent is good at the game, they're dropping Kaisa on 5 with at least 2 spell mana up. Maybe they'll even wait till turn 6 to hold up Rite of Negation mana if they're attacking on evens. But the reason you do this is because of Hourglass. Hourglass is so powerful. Especially because Kaisa can level on 5. Evolve is actually not difficult to hit on by turn 5, thanks to things that have just 2 keywords like Valor from Blinding Assault. Broadwing has 2 keywords as well, so same with Green Fang Warden. There's a lot of things that just have double keywords. Of course, Xerxai Hatchlings and Voidlings as well. So it's a very easy task to get a turn 5 leveled up Kaisa while still having at least 2 spell mana. And the reason it's very important to level up Kaisa on turn 5 is, one, to thread in a Kaisa attack, but also for that +2/+2 stat line from Evolve. If you get if your opponent has a 6/6 Kaisa, you probably have to use some type of premium tier removal. Like a stun plus Ravenous Flock, sure, that's dealing 4 damage, that's not enough. You're going to need something like a Vengeance, or a Ping and a Disintegrate, or, I don't know, like a Tom Kench that's been buffed to eat Kaisa. That's not that common, but, you know, it can happen. But that's one of the reasons why she is so strong right now. A 6/6 on 5 is a very good stat line. So how do we answer this? So how do we fix that problem of they have Kaisa on 5 plus Hourglass mana? In all honesty, at the moment, you just kind of have to hope they don't have it. I don't like that being the answer, but that is the answer, is that you just hope they don't have Hourglass, or your deck doesn't care if Kaisa attacks on 5. In theory, some people say that Noxus removal pile decks will counter Kaisa. I'm going to tell you right now, that is not true. Looking at the stats, neither TF Annie or TF Katarina are doing well against Kaisa decks. Also, and you might say, why is that? You would think that a deck that plays only Kaisas and Void Abominations should get destroyed by decks that are playing things like Disintegrate, right? Problem is, it's the removal suite. First off, let's assume your opponent plays Kaisa on 5 with 2 spell mana up. And you're like, okay, that's cool and all. I'm going to play Ping plus Disintegrate, right? That's a very common thing, like Make It Rain, Disintegrate, Blade's Edge, Disintegrate. And then your opponent responds with Hourglass. You just use 2 cards to basically get countered by 1 card. And you might say, like, okay, that's fine, but you got rid of the Hourglass. Yes, but you also got rid of some premium removal because Kaisa is so big, you had to use that premium removal in the form of Disintegrate. And now Kaisa is still around. And plus, the Kaisa decks are usually running Cataclysms, some even run Golden Ages, so it's not like, you might say, like, well, at least they're not going to have the attack token when the next turn starts. True, but that Kaisa probably has Scout, because Second Skin is very powerful, copying Scout from Valor or Greenfang Warden. So you might have to think, like, okay, assume they do have both. Assume they do have the Hourglass. Then you need to get ready for the Hourglass too. And that is, how do you do that? Scorched Earth? Aftershock? Sure. But here is where the strength of Kaisa, in my opinion, lies. The redundancy. The redundancy in terms of protection. You can't play around everything. Do you stagger it out and not play both of your spells at once to play around Hourglass? You play, like, Disintegrate first and then pass priority to your opponent and then ping? The problem with that is, sure, you're playing around Hourglass, but then you're setting yourself up for supercharges and basically just supercharge with that. Do you stack multiple removal at once to play around supercharge? To, you know, not give them a priority window to supercharge in response? You're then playing into both Rite of Negation and Hourglass. And then on top of that, they have Sharp Sights sometimes. You are thinking, maybe you think, maybe I'll use a Challenger or something to fight Kaisa. Maybe I'll use a big unit to fight Kaisa. They have some Quicksand sometimes too. Also, another reason why the Noxus removal piles aren't doing too well into Kaisa, a lot of Kaisa decks are now putting tough givers into their deck. Chain Vest, Ranger's Resolve, Duran Protege. And because of the way, because they made it so that you actually have to deal damage now to a Disintegrate target, Ping plus Disintegrate basically will get countered by Ranger's Resolve. So even if they have only 1 mana, they still might have a way to stop your removal. And that's why Kaisa is so strong. That and the fact she comes down quickly. Like, imagine if this was on turn 8. Like, imagine if Kaisa just was still 5 mana, but she had the text that said, like, I can't be played until you have 8 mana. That would be, first off, a huge nerf, and she'd probably be unplayable. But that it would actually make Kai'Sa reasonable, because you'd have more time to basically draw more removal to react to their protection suite. You'd have more mana as well to play around and try to respond to, because a lot of their protection spells are so cheap. Ranger's Resolve 1 mana, Hourglass is 2 mana, Sharp Sight's also 2 mana. It's so cheap. But yeah, that's why, in my opinion, Noxus is not doing as well as you would expect it to do against Kai'Sa, when previously the last kind of stacking units, stat stacking, keyword stacking deck, Pantheon, was weak to Noxus. So, very strong deck. And then you also have to realize this. Kai'Sa herself is just extremely powerful, possibly overtuned. Let's look at another aspect of her. Second Skin. Second Skin is so good. Your opponent, let's say you're playing against Kai'Sa and you actually do succeed in killing the first Kai'Sa. You're probably really happy because, you know, you've played against Kai'Sa. You know how tough it is to kill the first Kai'Sa. Your opponent has the Second Skin in hand, though. They can still cast the Second Skin on a unit to copy keywords without Kai'Sa on the field. The reason for that is because Second Skin gives the targeted units keywords to all Kai'Sas. So that means the second Kai'Sa coming down is going to have whatever keywords they chose. You know, Scout Challenger, Tough, Spell Shield, etc., etc. And that just makes the second Kai'Sa that much scarier. Good Kai'Sa players actually sometimes sacrifice their first Kai'Sa because of that. They'll play the Kai'Sa, have you throw some removal at the first Kai'Sa, and then they'll Second Skin Belveth the Elder to have the second Kai'Sa come down with Spell Shield right away, making it that much harder to interact with. And then on the second Kai'Sa, that's when they'll use their protection suite, their Ranger's Resolves, their counter magic, their hourglasses, etc., etc. And then that's just much harder to deal with the second Kai'Sa. And assuming you can deal with that or they just never draw it, then you have to worry about if your opponents are playing Void Abomination. Sure, some mono Kai'Sa players aren't playing Void Abomination. They've been cutting Void Abomination for more protection spells, more cheaper units too to get evolved on 5 more consistently. But a lot of people are still playing Void Abomination, which is why I think I need to talk about it. So very, very scary deck overall. And then, of course, thanks to her champion spell being supercharged as well, it's really tough to pass to your opponent after they play Kai'Sa because they just naturally play supercharge in their decks sometimes, usually, and then any extra Kai'Sas will also be supercharges. And thanks to Rite of Calling as well, they're pretty much running 6 copies of Kai'Sa, so it's extremely difficult, is basically what I'm saying, is to counter this deck. Now, what are its weaknesses, though? The units it's playing are not that good. It's really just trying to chump. In the early game, like turns 1 through 4, even on turn 5 sometimes, it's mostly just trying to chump a bit and buy some time. It's not trying to put on any pressure or do anything. It's just playing units out there, and those units are pretty much going to be chump blockers, and their main priority is just working towards Evolve. So how do you punish that? Go fast. Basically, just put some pressure on them, force them to do bad blocks. If you're forcing them to do blocks, they'll have less units. If they have less units, that's less keywords for them to choose for Second Skin. Now, how are the other ways to counter this? You can... Now, here's the problem. If you want to go in a different direction and you're like, oh, but streamer, I don't like the fast style of decks. I don't want to really push damage in. Okay, that's cool. We're fine with that. We got, there's some other ways too. You can try freezes. Like, freezes are fine. Stuns are strong too. Like, if you freeze Kai'Sa, you can then block the Kai'Sa. Sure, Icathian Rain is still pinging some stuff, but now by freezing Kai'Sa, you're forcing your opponent to either use some of their tricks defensively now. Are they going to Sharp Sight? Are they going to Quicksand? Hourglass defensively? Now, the problem with that idea is you would need a big unit, so maybe something from Ash or Udyr. But yeah, silences are also good, so things like Blinded Mystic. Sure, you might say Blinded Mystic can't hit champions, though, streamer, right? Yes, of course, but that's for the Void Abomination. Your main game plan would be find another way to deal with Kai'Sa, and then you never have to worry about Void Abomination thanks to Blinded Mystic because it pierces Spell Shield, because it's not a skill. Or you can also use like the classic response for just big finishers, Aloof Travelers. Aloof Travelers you would see it getting rid of things like Aurelion Soul, Arsenal, so why not Void Abomination? And sometimes you might even get lucky as well, and you might not discard make your opponent discard Void Abomination, but they might discard Kai'Sa instead, which is also a positive. But yeah, as we analyze this deck, it just seems really strong. Plus, there's not really like a concrete list. Like, there's so many tech choices the deck has. Some people like to play no Radiant Guardians. Some people like all 3 Radiant Guardians. 2 to 3 Void Abominations, sometimes none. Chain Vest, Ranger Resolve, Sharp Sights, Concerted Strikes as well. There's an insane amount of teching that can be done. And on the ladder, where there are closed deck lists, unless you want to use a third-party website to find your opponent's match history, it's really hard to tell what's in your opponent's deck and what you want to play around. So it's like, do I play around Concerted Strikes? Am I going to play around Sharp Sights? Am I going to play around etc, etc, etc? And that's the strength of Kai'Sa. They just have so much protection. There's so much redundancy in the protection. Thanks to Rite of Calling, they can easily have Kai'Sa on 5 because it's pretty much playing 6 Kai'Sas. So, how do we counter this? Like I said, go fast or stock up on removal, I'd say. The second idea is not as great, but stock up on removal, try to kill Kai'Sa, and have a game plan for Void Abomination as well. The problem with that second idea is that's a little weaker to other Kai'Sa variants like Severe Kai'Sa, because Severe herself turns into a threat as well, and Severe Kai'Sa usually plays Absolver as well, and then you have to deal with the standard, Severe plus Absolver, giving your entire board Overwhelm. But again, we're mostly talking about Mono Kai'Sa here. So let's actually go and look at some decks here to counter what's it called? To counter Kai'Sa, or at least our favorite in the Kai'Sa. So, as I was saying, go fast is a good strategy. Going big with some freezes, also a good strategy. Just going big in general is kind of a good strategy. So first off, what do we have? We got Bard Illaoi. Now I know, a lot of people don't like Bard. There's a reason why Bard Illaoi is so popular. Bard Illaoi is popular not purely because of Kai'Sa, but it's popular because it has a good matchup table against a lot of decks, and it's still slightly favored against Kai'Sa. I'd say it's probably in the hands of a good player. Bard Illaoi has about a 55% win rate against Kai'Sa. It's around 55% favored for the Bard Illaoi player. Of course, you might say, but streamer, I want to hard counter the deck. I'll have some honorable mentions after we're done looking at these 5 decks, but I don't want to give decks that only beat Kai'Sa and then lose to everything else. I think that is a bad idea. I think if you are playing this game, you do not only want to beat Kai'Sa. I'd say if that is your game plan, is to only beat one deck, something bad's happened to the meta. But as I was saying, Bard Illaoi. Why is Bard Illaoi good? First off, it's doing 2 of the things I was saying is good. One, you're putting on a lot of pressure early. Bird, Esmus, and C's Voice all put on a solid amount of pressure early, forcing your opponent to basically play defensively. You get to capitalize on this with Blood in the Water as well. Riptide Sermon is a little bit of extra chip damage because they don't have that much healing Their healing is pretty much just Radiant Guardian if they even play it. So that's pretty good. You could even, now I will do this, like quick honorable mention. I'd say if you really want to play Illaoi and just really just crush Kai'Sa, Illaoi Lux is actually pretty good because you get to play things like Concerted Strike. Concerted Strike is very, very solid. Lux is also pretty sweet against Kai'Sa as well, thanks to her Final Sparks. But even without Lux and just playing Bard instead, because I think Bard Illaoi, while it might not be as great as Lux Illaoi is against Kai'Sa, I think Bard Illaoi just has an insanely good matchup table against everything else. You have things like Tentacle Smash. Tentacle Smash is great. Riptide Sermon is a huge tempo swing. The burn is nice. It helps develop the board. You get rid of a unit. It's basically Tri-Beam for Bilgewater. And of course, like I said, the Blood in the Water, the Rally, is basically like a good solid finisher. The version I'm showing here is also even playing a 1-of Cosmic Binding just to really, really slow down the Kai'Sa decks. So, big fan of this deck. There's a lot of variants of this deck too. Some people like to play the list as well. I'm not a big fan of the list, but you can try it. So, highly recommend trying this list out. Maybe, of course, tech it towards what you like. Like, some people like to play all 3 zaps, some people play 1, some people play 2. But I think this is a very solid choice if you want to just do well against Illaoi without losing too much to anything else in the meta. Now our next deck. What are we going to look at next? Another deck that a lot of people are very passionate about is a way to say it. A lot of people hate this deck. A lot of people love this deck. Azir Aurelia. Azir Aurelia has gotten some more power added to it recently. First off, Aurelia got buffed, so she has a 2 now. But the other big thing is the addition of Domination. Domination is really, really strong. Basically, Domination is a leveled up Azir. She gives you a leveled up Azir ability. And Kai'Sa doesn't have any pings. Kai'Sa's not pinging Domination. Kai'Sa's not pinging Sparring Student or Shadow Apprentice, so we're just trying to push some damage in. Like, this is the deck that you are playing if you want to go and you want to push in some damage. And this deck is really good against Kai'Sa, in my opinion, and it does have some bad matchups. Like, you don't want to run into, say, a Noxus removal pile, basically like a Make It Rain deck with Ravenous Flocks, etc., etc. But again, this video is about countering Kai'Sa and beating Kai'Sa. All the Sand Soldiers, all the Blades, all that pressure you're putting on the field early, that's really messing with Kai'Sa. That's really gonna make her game plan difficult to pull off. You might say, what if my opponent lands Radiant Guardian? Again, you have to prepare for that. You have to realize that, like, okay, my opponent might have Radiant Guardians. Defiant Dance. Defiant Dance, and of course Homecoming as well, is how you deal with it. Your opponent is like, okay, sure, you're getting some chip damage, turn 5 Radiant Guardian. Honestly, you probably like turn 5 Radiant Guardian, because then you Defiant Dance, you get the Blade Dance, you might get some Sand Soldiers from your Azir or Deus, and you just keep that pressure. You keep that pressure getting pushed in. And your opponent is going to be on the other side crying because they're playing Kai'Sa and they're in shambles because they don't know how their deck is losing and how they're getting run over because they're playing what they think is the best deck in the format, which honestly it probably is. But it's because you analyze the meta, you analyze the deck, and you brought a deck that is meant to beat Kai'Sa without losing to too many other things. But honestly, I do think Kai'Sa decks could tech for Azir Aurelia, but a lot of them are not. So right now, a lot of Kai'Sa decks are actually teching for the mirror. I feel like if they wanted to tech for Azir Aurelia, I'd say Fearsomes and Overwhelms. Merciless Hunters, Void Blasters. I'd say, like, if Azir Aurelia was very popular too, maybe Action as well could be played in Kai'Sa. You just go off mono Kai'Sa, go into Action Kai'Sa. Action could then block the sand soldiers or the blades to level up faster and get more value that way. But I think I'm overstating just how good that would be. I just honestly think Kaisa is so soft and so weak to Azir Aurelia, and a lot of people like this. Now let's say like you're like, okay, but I don't like Pink Region. Or I want to play Deny. First off, don't play Deny. Deny is not meant for this deck. You would rather be playing Homecoming or Defiant Dance. You don't want Deny. You want units to push in damage, and you want spells to keep your units safe or give you insanely good tempo. Deny is not it. Maybe play Nopify, but in all honesty, Nopify and Deny, not that great at the moment for these type of decks. But let's say you don't like Ionia. Let's say you're not a fan of either of Bard because you're like, oh, Bard's cringe, I don't like him. Let's say you're not a fan of Azir Aurelia because you're like, I don't like Pink Region. Okay. Let's stay with the same strategy of going really fast though, and putting on tempo and pushing tempo and putting on pressure on our opponent. We got Annie Jin. Now Annie Jin, why is Annie Jin so good against Kaisa? It's because we're doing exactly what I was saying we want to do. We want to pressure them. Their units in the early game are not doing much. Their early game units want to just be there for the keyword and then to chump block. Annie Jin is a difficult deck to play in my opinion. But Annie Jin, when played well, is very scary. They've got some stun units too, so those chump blockers don't mean too much. They've got insane amounts of burn. Corsair, Saboteur, the Rookie, Demolitionist, honestly Tusk Speaker, and Doom Beast as well for a little extra burn. You could even say leveled up Jin. The spells as well are more burn. They can only really counter one, maybe two if they're running two rights as well. And they're going to definitely save the rights for Decimate. Maybe they'll write like a big stack of skills, but honestly, you're probably happy about that because that means your Decimate's probably free to get 4 damage off their face. But yeah, basically you're just gonna go, you're going fast, you're gonna get explosive turns. You want to go get those really early explosive turns where you have like Annies and Corsairs, maybe like that turn 1 Annie, turn 2 Corsair rear guard, or maybe some Saboteurs as well. You've got so many 1-drops, you have so much redundancy in your early game, and then you help get some extra pings from Jin. Like I said before, they don't really have much healing. If they do get a Radiant Guardian down, you do have, of course, Noxian Fervors to try to stop the Radiant Guardian from getting a heal or two, which should win you the game. But yeah, I feel like this is definitely very strong. Kaisa takes time to set up their board. They're very slow in setting up their board. And if you really, really need it, if it's starting to get a little late, like you didn't get as explosive as the start you wanted, you got your Stage Hands, you got your Sunhawks to try to, in theory, stun the Kaisa to prevent her from attacking and basically wiping out your board. But they do have some cards you do want to watch out for. Petricide Broadwing is one of their strongest cards, in my opinion, against you. They get an early Broadwing into a Duran Protege if they're playing Protege. That can just really mess you up. They'll have basically a 4/4 with Tough Challenger, and you're not going to have a good time with that. If you somehow haven't had an explosive turn and they do get the Radiant Guardian and you haven't gotten enough chip damage with your units, you're going to have a tough time because you want to get a lot of chip damage in and then finish off with burn, Decimates, Noxian Fervors. Okay, so we talked about some early aggression. What if you are just saying like, streamer, I don't want to go aggro. I don't want to just play these like burn decks, Azir Aurelia. Okay. I mentioned freezes, right? I was talking about freezes, but needing to go and have your units big enough so that they can still block Kaisa and kill her even though you froze her and survive the Acathian Rain Pings. You might think like, oh, okay, are you going to show us Ashe LeBlanc? No. I do think Ashe LeBlanc is solid. I just think if you are looking for a deck with freezes to beat Kaisa, I think there is a slightly better option than that. Action Udyr. Sure, we don't really play freezes. I know I was lying. But of course you can play the Three Sisters. We're pretty much playing freezes, in all honesty. Quicksand, Troll Chant. They're pretty much doing freezes. You want the Quicksand over something like the Three Sisters because you get rid of all the keywords. You get rid of all the keywords, Acathian Rain doesn't do so hot, right? Now you might say, why so many Iron Elixirs? Again, you gotta keep your units alive from that Acathian Rain. Sometimes you might not have the Quicksand. But what is Action Udyr actually doing? Basically, we're mid-range ball of stats. You might say, like, isn't this just Bard again? Honestly, kind of. But you got Merciless Hunter to pick off some of their annoying units that you don't want to have get second skin. So Belveth the Elder and Valor. Action puts in his early game tempo. You know, he does his thing. And then you got Udyr and, of course, Vulpine Wanderer here to actually win you the game. You build big units, build a big Udyr. Udyr is so big, maybe he has regen. He's able to easily block Kaisa, and then maybe even use a Troll Chant or even a Quicksand, so her quick attack doesn't matter, or Acathian Rain doesn't really do too much, and then you're looking great. Now you might say, like, streamer, that's a really long way away. Yes, I will admit that. That does. Problem with that is it does take some setup. I still think it's fine. You don't really need to... You can honestly let the first Kaisa hit you, I think, with this deck. As long as she doesn't have Scout. If she has Scout and you're getting Scout attacked by a Kaisa, then obviously, like, that's really strong. And that's really hard to beat. But I think this is a really good deck. I think, like, you get the Shurima stuff that a lot of Shurima decks love. You get Rite of Negation and Quicksand. No Hourglass in this deck. We're not really wanting to play Hourglass. We want some interaction. This is why we're playing all these Desert Duels, all these grappling hooks. Your opponent comes, and that's also another reason we play Elixir of Iron, to get a cheap activation for grappling hook. You might say, why not Shapestone? Honestly, you could try Shapestone over Elixir of Iron. I kind of just like the extra health from Elixir, and we don't need to activate it unlike we do with Shapestone. But you can definitely consider it. But yeah, I'm a big fan of this deck. Definitely a deck that's still in progress. Again, like I said, you can definitely try some Three Sisters. I've seen some people like to play all three Soothsayers. I am not a big fan of that. I do like at least one. Some people like two. Tavern Keeper honestly might get cut because it's not that great, but it is nice against the random anti-Jin players you'll run into. Triple Babbling Bjerg might be a little overkill, but it just helps you find your Udyrs. Udyr is literally the only hit for Babbling Bjerg, so these Bjergs are always going to hit Udyrs. Honestly, could see myself going down to 2 Babbling Bjergs and playing a one of Three Sisters. Kind of do like that. But we have so many ways to get stances. You could also consider a Hyara Allseer or something, but between Udyr, Vulpine Wanderer, and Inner Beast, we're going to be giving we're going to level up Udyr quickly. We're going to get quite a few stances, and we're going to make a really big Udyr. And we're going to just hopefully win the game with that big Udyr. So not really going fast, but going big, and trying to use some of Shurima's tools against Kaisa as well. Now, one of you are saying, like, okay, that's cool and all. You got, like, some fast decks here, and now we got a slower deck, a more mid-rangey deck. But what if I want to go really, really slow? I got the deck for you. Tom Raka. Everyone's favorite Tom Soraka deck. This is the current build I've been playing and messing around with. Honestly, I'm not sure about it. I am still working on it, I will say that. But I do honestly think Tom Soraka is solid right now. I will say this though. If you are running into a lot of Noxus removal pile decks, do not play this deck. This deck cannot win against Noxus removal pile. This deck has, like, I would estimate maybe like a 20% win rate against Noxus removal piles. And that's because all your units are usually damaged anyway, and you're hurting your own units, so kind of sucks. But if you just want to beat Kaisa, I think this deck is great. Triple Blinded Mystic, so you will never be afraid of Void Abomination. Tom Kench eats all the units, and then maybe even eats a Kaisa as well, in theory. Insanely decent... That's not a good way to describe it. Decent card draw too, thanks to Soraka. You could try, honestly, cutting the third Soraka for a 1 of Yumi. I know some people like that. The reasoning for that is it gets to buff Tom, and if you buff Tom, the extra stats on Tom is really nice. So, you know, he gets more stats so he can eat things easier. I kind of like the third Soraka over the 1 of Yumi, but you could definitely try it. Outside of that, though, pretty much standard Tom Raka. You're just trying to get a Star Springs win. We even cut the 1 mana 0/3. I can't remember what that card is called. The reasoning for that is, again, it's a little slow and it doesn't do much against Kai'Sa. And again, Kai'Sa is the most popular deck, and we're trying to beat Kai'Sa. But yeah, I like the deck. I think this deck is really underrated right now. I know, like, the reason you don't see this deck, honestly, is because of Noxus. Now, that's why I do think in a tournament setting where you have a ban phase, this deck actually gets even better. You will bring this deck and you'll be like, I'll let Kai'Sa, you bring this deck and 2 other decks that are at least even against Kai'Sa, and you're like, I will let Kai'Sa through and I will always ban the Ravenous Flock deck. Hopefully your opponent doesn't bring like 3 Ravenous Flock decks. Some people would probably do that. But yeah, I really like this deck. I think it's okay for ladders if you run into a lot of Kai'Sa and not much Ravenous Flock decks, and I think it gets even better in a tournament setting with a ban phase. Now, why though? Hush. Hush is really solid. You get to hush Kai'Sa before she does anything. You buy yourself a turn. By buying yourself a turn, you get to set up a Tahm Kench activation. I don't know how you want to call it, but basically it lets you set up Tom eating Soraka. And then, of course, there's always the protection suite, but Tom gets through a lot of the protection. Sharpsight's not really helping too much against Tom. Ranger's Resolve doesn't do anything against this deck. It's really just Hourglass and Counterspell, Rite of Negation. Of course, you're gonna play around Supercharge and do it right away before they Supercharge, because honestly, we don't really have a good way of piercing a spell shield outside of a Hush. And I guess you could argue technically Tom's spell itself. But yeah, big fan of this deck. Now, let's talk about some honorable mentions. Like some decks that are also good against Kai'Sa, in my opinion, but I just don't think are good on the ladder, because while they might be good against Kai'Sa, they're just bad against everything else. Yasuo. Yasuo Katarina is really good against Kai'Sa, in my opinion. The problem with Yasuo Katarina is it kind of sucks against a lot of other things. Really bad against anything with Noxus. Bad against like Azir Aurelia. Just bad against a lot of things in general. But all the stuns are really good. Your opponent tries to attack him with Kai'Sa, you stun it. They try to counter it, you counter as well. Pretty good. You're probably playing Ravenous Flock as well, so you have solid removal, so you could definitely try out Yasuo Katarina. Just be prepared to know that you're not going to do too well against decks that are not Kai'Sa. I mentioned it already a little bit before. Freezes. Basically Ashe LeBlanc. Problem with that is Ashe LeBlanc's not that good of a deck. On a ladder, again, kind of soft to... kind of soft to Flock piles. I'd say in the current meta, there are really 3 things you have to look at. 3 decks you have to look at. Kai'Sa decks, Bartolai decks, and basically TF Noxus piles. And I don't think there is a deck that beats all 3 of them. I think you basically have to choose 2 of them to do well against, or at least go even against, while basically saying the 3rd deck you didn't choose is always going to destroy you. I think the correct play is to sacrifice the TF Noxus pile deck matchup, because it's the least played out of the Kai'Sa decks, between the Kai'Sa decks and the Bartolai decks. Kai'Sa and Bartolai are just played so much more than any Noxus deck. So, that's gonna be it, pretty much. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Probably gonna do more of these decks in the future whenever like a really powerful, popular deck is around that a lot of people just don't really know how to counter, or it's not a very easy way to counter, like just play lifesteal or just play healing kind of thing. I will say this, even though there are ways to counter Kai'Sa, or at least attempt to play Kai'Sa, she's still a really strong deck. And in all honesty, the best way at the end of the day to beat Kai'Sa is honestly probably just to play Kai'Sa and tech your Kai'Sa deck to beat the mirror match. But of course, it is really fun to try and find ways to beat Kaisa, and I'm still working on it myself. I'm still trying a lot of other things. I'm trying like Anivia piles, Field of Rush piles that are teched for it, Go Hard decks that are also teched for it, Darkness piles that are trying to tech for it with things like Mini Morph. Not having much success with those, but I'm still trying. We do have a balance patch coming up soon, though, so maybe the balance patch will, you know, bring Kaisa's power level down a bit. Honestly, I don't feel like it's going to be brought down insanely much. I feel like Kaisa is still going to be a meta deck after the balance patch, but only time will tell. So yeah, Kaisa is definitely one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the format. So right now, basically, it's just either play Kaisa or try your best to counter Kaisa, and we've gone over Kaisa's strengths and weaknesses and how to, in theory, counter Kaisa. So yeah, try your best. Good luck on the ladder. I'd love to hear what you guys have been trying to do to counter Kaisa. But until I see you guys in my next video, that's going to be it for today. I hope you all enjoyed the video. And if you guys loved the video, and I'd also, or you have a deck that you think as well that I didn't mention counters Kaisa, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments down below. And if you guys just enjoyed the video in general, I'd love it if you could leave a like or a comment down below as well. And if you guys want to keep up with the Legends of Runeterra content, you can always go and subscribe to the channel as well. And if you want to watch me play some Legends of Runeterra, you can go and check me out over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Zenaton, where I stream pretty much every single day. Anyway, though, with that all said and done, thank you all again once more for watching this video, and until I see you guys in the next one, bye!